Welcome. It's the March meeting of the Tucson Herpetological Society. Before continuing, I'd like to recognize that we are in the Sonoran Desert, the traditional homelands of the Tohono O'odham and Pasquayaqui peoples. Sonoran Desert has many herpetological place names. I work at the Desert Lab on Tumamak Hill, which is a transliteration of Cheva Magdoag, which means Hill of the Horned Lizard. And across the valley is Baba Doag, also known as the Catalina Mountains. Baba Doag means Frog Mountain. Looking at the west side of Push Peak, you might be able to discern a giant toad.
Ooh. So that's something.
Yeah.
Couple of good toads.
Our most recent Sonoran herpetologist has been published. You can access it by going to our website. If you scroll down the front page, you'll be able to click on a picture of the cover and read it. Roger Rep took the cover photo of a really handsome spiny lizard. We are accepting proposals for our CH Low Herpetology Research Fund and the Sonoran Desert Toad Fund through the middle of May 15th. John Ginter will be receiving the low fund proposals, and I'll be accepting the Sonoran Desert Toad Fund proposals. While we're talking about toads, if you happen to see any active toads right now, as we've been receiving reports of them, please contact us. Take a photo and take as many notes as possible. It'd be very interesting to learn more about what we're seeing. Anything to add, Brian?
Yeah, I would just echo that. They're very interested, especially in this toad. Encilius alvarius, the Sonoran Desert toad. We know that it emerges at times during the overwintering period, unlike most of the Sonoran Desert toads, to hydrate. But in this especially dry year, there have been a number of fatalities recorded of this species and others that hydrate in the normal fashion. But we're very interested in documenting it.
We have merch, and so one way to support our organization is by buying merch, or just making a donation, or volunteering. The follow-up books to Snakes of Arizona will be these here, and if you're interested in donating a photograph, an observation, or a record, a voucher, you can visit this website to get more details. There are two Gila monster studies that are being undertaken right now. One by Paul Mayer, who's looking at genetics of Gila monsters in the Tucson area. And Anthony Pawlicki, one of our one of our directors on the board, is also studying Gila monsters in the Boot Heel of New Mexico. 17th through 21 March, we will be at a landscape restoration, a cattle tank, a riparian restoration for turtles and frogs. If you want to volunteer and help out.
That just passed.
No, yeah, I think it was.
We're in the 31st.
It's over.
Good catch. Thanks. Yeah.
There was an issue with funding, and so they had postponed it, so it's gonna be, I think, in July, so we'll let you know when we have more information.
July.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I was recently contacted by the founder of the State Herpetology Association of Sonora, and wanting to reach out as partner organizations or have a correspondence membership. And so, yeah, this is a new group. They don't have a website yet, but we'll be keeping you posted as things develop. There's a desire that at some point we might have a joint meeting. And if we're able to fundraise we could produce a meeting in Sonora, which they would really like to do and that we've been wanting to do for many years. This is kind of exciting. So all of our previous meetings have been recorded and are on our YouTube channel. Unfortunately, I don't have the details for next month's speaker because it's been a long week, a long month. But we do have a speaker lined up for next month. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brian Sullivan, who is an emeritus professor from Arizona State University, who, as you just recall, maybe that he studied Sonoran Desert anurans, toads, and but also has been working on Regal Horned Lizards. So without further ado, let's welcome him up.
Thank you. As a broken down field biologist, I may need this chair, so getting it in the ready state. So, pleasure to be here, recognize some friends in the audience and some new faces, and we'll leave it at that. It's one of the oldest ones that's up here. So tonight, I'll be speaking to you about the natural history of Regal Horned Lizards. And it's very important to acknowledge my two co-authors, Mason and Chad, a couple of great youngsters at Arizona Game and Fish. And we collaborated on a number of projects, and they joined me in the analysis that I'll be reporting on here today for the Regal Horned Lizard. So without their abilities and expertise, the study would be woefully inadequate. Now, another name for this effort is just 10 years of radio tracking, allowing me to get close to these animals on a regular basis, which I should just admit is my interest in radio-telemetry. Most that use this technique are interested in the organism's relationship to the abiotic and biotic environment. They measure all sorts of variables and such when they get to each animal. And in many cases, there's no knock on them. I love many of these people dearly. They largely ignore the animal when they're found it. They might report just a few anecdotes about what it's doing. But for me, that's the starting point. I don't take any data about, the abiotic and biotic environment unless it happens to intersect with the behavior of the animal, and that's what I'm interested in. Then I follow it for a half hour, an hour, however much time I have. And so my real interest in radio-telemetry is to get me to the animal on a regular and consistent basis. And Regal Horned Lizards make this very easy on us because you can just super glue one of these small radio tags to it back, and they will happily, I can hope, carry it for you until they shed their skin. And in my population, that's very predictable twice a year, as we'll find out. And then you have to recapture them, retag them, but it's a great way to get to know these animals. Now, I started this study at my long-term research site north of town, where, as Beto mentioned, I was primarily involved with anuran studies. Then more recently, 20 years or so ago, I turned to desert tortoises and such, but I've been seeing Regal Horned Lizards there all this time, and I thought, hey, I've got these radio tags, I'll start tracking them. I looked up the first published paper on the spatial ecology of Regal Horned Lizards, and although based on a small sample size, it was by, I'd say arguably the most famous herpetologist in the Southwest, you all know and love, I'm sure, in memory at least, Chuck Lowe. And these are a couple of quotes that set the stage for what, and perhaps Wade is the only one here who might have known better, but at least people like me, I accepted that, yes, Phrynosoma solare is, although one of the larger species of Phrynosoma in the Southwest, a largely sedentary species, and perhaps even relative to many of the other horned lizards, like the flat-tailed horned lizard that had seen over the last 20 years and knew that they could move considerable distances. the general notion was Phrynosoma solare doesn't do that. And so that these statements made sense, even though he only followed a handful of animals. And right after he got here to U of A, began his work in the Sonoran Desert. But this is what I imagined to be true. Turns out not to be true at all. And so, yes, it ain't necessarily so. The two things I think you'll leave here convinced of, I hope, is that we now know they move a lot more than we thought they did under that paradigm, which, by the way, it wasn't just Chuck. A handful of people, researcher at ASU, grad student in the early 70s, agreed with Chuck. Now, remember, we aren't denigrating their field capabilities. They didn't have radio-telemetry. So they had to go out, find these difficult to find animals, which those of you I think that have seen them know how cryptic they can be, and then find them repeatedly. Well, I'm cheating, right? I've got a radio tag on them, much easier for me to do it. The second component is, in spite of that revelation, is the fact that they don't move at all for considerable periods, much longer than we thought. 6 months overwintering. So very different natural history than we imagined based on those previous studies. So I love this quote from Erica, and I don't know if Erica might be out there in the virtual wonderland, but I credit her with this comment that I heard 20 some odd years ago. When I first started radio tracking, it was with chuckawolves in the 1990s. And it just blew my mind what I discovered about their social behavior via radio tracking relative to what I thought. And I thought I knew that animal very well at that time. I had a PhD student who worked on them for years. But it wasn't until we started radio tracking that we really found out about their social biology in relation to space use. Same thing happened when we were working on Gila monsters a few years later, involved with the likes of Roger Rep on this and others, Dan Beck. Had the same exact eye-opening experience with desert tortoises. And then here I was having it again with Phrynosoma solare. So I believe this absolutely. I've had a couple of ecologists who aren't really herpetologists, having heard this, ask me, do you really believe that? And I absolutely, yes. You don't really know your animal until you radio track it. You can make lots of important inferences that can get published in Science and Nature and Ecology. But if you want to say you know the natural history of your animal, radio tracking is the way to do it. Whoops, that's the wrong way. Okay, some methodological asides. Individuals can be identified by the unique spot pattern on their ventral surface. This helped me keep a very, I like to think, as near to hands-off approach. I didn't want to have to toe clip them. I didn't want to pick tag them. I didn't want to paint them. I did have to pick them up, but just turning them over, taking a photo, hopefully only doing that twice a year when they drop their tag and I re-tag them, minimized my physical handling of the animal. And I have only a small number, never more than 20 individuals in my study site, and split between males and females. This was easy to keep track of. I could often just do it by knowing who they were in the area and remembering, what was next to the umbilical scar, very convenient central point. There are now programs that'll do this for you, but I could quickly scan my photos for previous years and know which animal I had. Now, here's another giveaway in terms of this is the summation of a year in the life of Phrynosoma solare. There are 5 periods that, and these are arbitrary delineations based on the observations of animals. And these categories are first brumation, late September, all the way to the 1st of June are the potential downtimes for these horned lizards. Talk more about that. So October to March is what we call the brumation period. Post-brumation recovery, a time when the horned lizards don't move much, April and May. Some are still in brumation, but those that have emerged are not doing much in the way of movement. They are beginning to feed and they go through ecdysis, they shed their skin. Mating season, that's when all hell breaks loose. Males especially become exceptionally active, much more so than we imagined. And that's June and July. It's followed by the nesting period. Of course, that's the job of the females. Males have gotten done, we'll say, with this taxing mating period where they're expending a great deal of energy. But we'll just call that nesting because this is the big event for the group as a whole. And then it's followed by something that's somewhat akin to the post-brumation. So we called it pre-brumation recovery, in which both males and females are, I think it's safe to conclude, recovering, attempting to feed as much as they can from what they just spent all their energy doing, which was nesting and mate searching, prior to going down for the winter. So now let's see, what were the observations that led us to think this is a reasonable portrayal of the life cycle of a horned lizard. So this is a brumating animal. I know you have no idea what you're looking at, even though I put the little red circle there, but we'll zoom in. And that's what you're looking at. If you can see dead center, that's the tag, and you're seeing just the tag, because just as Wade told us, and again, that's the tag, there's the antenna. Wade told us in a nice little paper that horned lizards of this species, when they overwinter, brumate, I like to call it, hibernate in the old vernacular, just shimmy into the debris at the very surface of the soil. Mine always were at this level of depth. Rarely was the tag actually covered. So that means just the barest few millimeters of debris covered their body. And that animal didn't move for 6 months. Now here's a drier winter. It's again, if you notice that one was at a creosote shrub under the canopy. This one's at the base of the creosote. And yet there's only soil in this case. Nothing's grown up around it. This picture was taken in January. It's a dry year. Have 10 years worth of opportunities here. Sometimes very dense shrubs. This was a shrub that was tagged for another reason, but a horned lizard went to it. I wouldn't normally tag it for fear it might, who knows, draw some predator or some person to it. But in any case, animal went into this large salt bush. So sometimes we couldn't visibly detect it, but we assumed, and because they emerged in the spring from that bush with their tag functional, that they had overwintered the entire time there. Now here's one in a situation where there was enough rain that the tag and the animal underneath it end up being covered over by annual plants that are germinating, beginning to grow. Occasionally those individuals would, I think, shimmy just enough to break that crust, and perhaps the plants that are beginning to grow on either side, and you'd come and see them more exposed. But that was only in occasional winters where that would occur around the lizard. This was one of those, and this female, in fact, moved. There are a small number that move in the winter. Typically, they stay at the same shrub. They just move a few inches, one side or the other. And I didn't know, I wasn't measuring all those other abiotic variables to know, was it sunnier, was it shadier, and so on. I have some guesses, but most of the lizards didn't move. This one did, and this was a very wet year, lots of growth, and it moved from being surrounded, almost impacted by germinating plants, to just here. I had to part the grasses to see it, and then it remained there for the final 2 months. Didn't move from that location. So just amazing. Burst agent creosote. My images, if you've noticed them, I should point out, Phrynosoma solare in my neck of the woods don't live like they do here in Tucson and other places, Oregon Pike, where I've seen large numbers of them, in which I was used to them being when I saw them in the 70s. Old Spanish Trail, the early 70s, I used to see them all the time over those rolling areas just east of town. And that's a rockier or upland, almost slope habitat, and they seem quite content there. Mine's relatively barren, saguaro-free, creosote bursage flat. It's a pathetic representation of the Sonoran Desert next to what you guys get to enjoy down here. Phoenix has been good to me, but it's a pit right? Well, these two shrubs are the common ones there in those flats, and they account for about 95% of the shrubs you can count up. I've had my students do plant surveys till they're green, and those are by far the dominant plants. What can we summarize here? We'll see some more data later about movements, but I want this to be a relatively data-free talk. But some tidbits. Only about 36 animals do I have a complete brumation period. It requires that in the fall, when they go through their second ecdysis, second shed event, I have to catch them before they go down and give them another tag. And I often failed at that. I just couldn't find, limited my sample size. Right? But after 10 years, I was able to follow a large enough number of males and females for an entire winter. So what I mean by that is the tag had to retain its transmission so that I could find the animal when it had emerged, even if that was June 1st. Thank God for Holopill. Their tags lasted 10 months instead of 6, or I never would have gotten all of this data. Okay, just some interesting aspects. Males longer than females, they go in about 2 weeks earlier. The earliest male going down for the winter was September 22nd. I'll just draw your attention to the fact that, for what I grew up thinking, listening to Bob Stebbins and every other physiologically inclined herpetologist, why do herps hibernate? Because the weather's too cold, right? We always imagined physiological ecology drives this event. It's clearly not the case for these horned lizards, right? Chuckwallas can thermoregulate more than adequately all the way into mid-November in the same exact environment, except they're on the rocks and they're eating plants, but they get to a body temperature that's higher than the preferred body temperature for the Regal Horned Lizard, and they do it just fine. They also can do it in February. So these horned lizards are not going down, I would argue, because of any thermoregulatory limitation imposed by the seasons. I've just dropped down to the take-home message here. Our hypothesis is that it's related to prey, and that their primary prey species, the rough seed harvester ant, simply isn't active for much of the year. It's a monsoon ant, at least in our habitat. We'll come back to why that's important when we get to their feeding information. But can last from September to June, I mentioned that. And when you account for their representation in the environment, they're selecting burr sage more commonly than creosote. Again, somebody have to follow in my footsteps, measure all those variables of humidity and temperature, figure out if there is an advantage that makes sense for that slightly denser shrub, right? I didn't show you many pictures of any, I think, in this sequence of an animal at a burr sage because they're too hard to get, right? Too much leaf clutter. I was picking creosotes because I had a few, especially in a dry year. Now, this is what I've already alluded to. Some continue brumating during this time period, but the vast majority, there was only 2 individuals in all the years that made it to June 1st. I was certain they were dead. I never had an animal die overwintering, by the way. It suggests that, again, physiological concerns aren't paramount. I'm convinced, and I know Wade, I've talked about these issues before, that predation is what drives their short lifespan. Which, just an aside here, because I've mentioned it, I have hardly any animals over those 10 years that made it to 3 years. So we'll come back to that, but let's continue then. What are they doing when they're feeding? Are they doing this in April or May? Well, if they have their druthers, I'm convinced they want to be looking for this animal. That's the rough seed harvester ant, Myrmex rugosus, named for that corrugated appearance on the frontal aspect there of the head, corduroy-like grooves. And I'm confident all of you have seen the large nests. You actually can see them in town here in Tucson or closely related species. Big meter diameter disc, large trunk trails. Knowing Bob Johnson, the ant specialist at ASU, we were grad students together, who has worked on these for decades. I was the happiest I've been in a long time when he called me to tell me, we have revised the colony size estimate after arduous and painful, I tested that, work with these nests from what they'd originally thought was about 4,000 individuals to 12,000. And you'll know why I think that's important in just a moment, but in any case, so 12,000 individuals up to 25 to 30-year lifespan for these colonies, long-lived ants. This is what it looks like. Again, that's my habitat, very different from Old Spanish Trail, Regal Horned Lizards, but a high density of these nests, 15 to 25 per hectare. And you can see their trails when they're out there with that. That nest is one that I followed for 20 years for other reasons than horned lizards. Now, the individuals, and we'll have another shout out to Wade here. This will probably continue all night, and others. We know about their feeding biology in terms of their ability to consume these nasty prey species, if you ask me. They have the most potent venom of any of the Hymenoptera, as I understand it, unless that's been recalibrated recently. Here in the Southwest, the horned lizards have somewhat of an immunity to it, but they have a great system in which with their fleshy mucus-coated tongue, they snap them up, and if you've ever seen this, they are snapped, thrown back of the throat, coated with mucus. We know this from these other studies, and swallowed, no mastication involved, no opportunity. If you're the horned lizard, you're hoping to avoid, because you don't want to give them purchase opportunities, purchase as in making a purchase with their mandibles, biting you, which then would be followed up by multiple stings. And that's how many people in the room have experienced rhinophagosis. So I've had the worst you can imagine, not knowing what yours have been, where they somehow get up your field pants because I'm wearing so much clothes. And it's right in the most tender region you can imagine, well, next to it, on the inner part of your thigh. And the welts that develop from each of the individual stings before you can rip off your pants and start, slapping the bejeebers out of your thigh to make it stop. It often remains, it becomes hardened, it becomes purplish red, takes weeks for that to go away. So that's quite an impressive animal. But horned lizards are one of those that have come to be able to avoid those consequences. And I apologize, I'm not the photographer that Randy Babb and so many other members of THS are, but just to show one of my animals getting an ant there. They'll go right up to the disc opening. This was something that was also a sort of a, not a paradigm, but I was struck by how many people imagine, because those ants are so nasty, that they wouldn't forage at a disc for fear of being mobbed. And I found they're quite capable. If we get to the end of the show and I can show a little video, you'll see they're very competent at avoiding ants, even when they're very active right on a disc. So in any case, that's a reminder that I've got the movie loaded up here, and we'll see how we're doing for time at the end. So they're just beginning to do feeding, but really it's going to be held off until the summer when they really have an opportunity for it following the rains. But if you've ever seen their large fecal pellets, when you get to the summer, if you find one of these and you know it's been produced by Phrynosoma solare, for us at our site exclusively from June 1st to September 30th, every fecal pellet that my herpetology class students had to disarticulate and count every head to make sure it wasn't one of the many other species. We have 31 different ants at our site, according to Bob Johnson. They were always Pogonia myrmex rugosa. Now, this isn't to say in April and May, I didn't occasionally see them take carabid beetles, didn't occasionally see them take small caterpillars and so on, but these are rare instances. And it's when Phrynomyrmex isn't widely available. They simply aren't abundant. Only a small number of nests are active, whereas in the summer months, in the morning, often 100% of the nests are active. Okay. Mating. This is when everything changed. The males become exceptionally active. These are two males that encountered each other. One was already on the rock in what I call a lookout position, more on that in a minute. The other one I was tracking, and we'd gone about 100 meters, and he just made his way to that other male. They inspect one another, they tongue flick each other's cloaca, they do a couple of the most trivial looking little head bobs you can imagine, and they ignore each other. And in fact, these males split up. That one on the right happened to go not more than 20 meters to the side, and there's a female, finds it, mates with her, and so on. They're not territorial. They have home ranges, but males are just searching for females. Now, when we get to mating in the actual event, I'll come back to how males might respond in a singular situation. So this is the home range of one male. And it's probably difficult for you to see the scale down there. It's about 500 meters across that bar. But from top to bottom is over 1 kilometer. You can probably see most of the green dots are down at the bottom with just a little spike, widely spaced. It was a day apart. That male moved 1,000 meters north and 1,000 meters back within 7 days. And I followed him for most of those. I'm convinced he was looking for females. Didn't find one, returned, and continued. I don't think it was a dispersal event in which he returned home instead of staying. And I don't think it was a feeding event. He wasn't going to nests. And in fact, he passed dozens of nests. He wanted to watch them do it. That was my first impression. He's going to stop at that one? No. He's going to stop at that? No. Just keeps going. And here is additional support for this. That little black box was my naive original 4 hectares. I knew what Chuck Lowe thought. They're not going to go far. I don't need a bigger box. But I did. These are all the animals in 1 year. And the 3 biggest movements are males who moved more than 1 kilometer. That individual on the lower right actually moved out to that right-hand side, you can't even see it, and back a second time in one mating period that year. That's the male on the left that we just saw, isolation, that's a different male. All of the little spikes outside of the box are from males. I'm just giving you that impression, and all the females are contained within the box. So very impressive differences in their home range. This is that lookout posture, you're following a male, they move quite rapidly. I would be from here to that door, and I'm tracking the animal. I actually can put down my radio gear and just leave it because I know I'll be able to keep them in sight now. I've got binoculars. And he'll be there, he'll just hop up on a rock, he'll scan to the front of him, turn to the side and so on, hop back down. He doesn't stay there for more than a handful of minutes. So I quickly realized, well, he's not basking, he's already warm. In fact, I'm good and hot. It's probably between 8 and 9 on a June morning, June 20th. We're both good and hot. I'm wondering when it's going to be done so I can go home. But I follow him once he moves off, and he does the same thing. Goes to another little rock. So I'm convinced he's looking for females, and I only saw that come to fruition. So one time with that pair of males that split up, another time, but I'm convinced this is what they're all about during that period. Oh, sorry. Here's one up in a dead creosote, just for, again, maybe 5 minutes. Live creosote, but you get the idea, doing things that you wouldn't expect a horned lizard to do. And leading to this. So, a male with a female. Now, unfortunately, I saw lots of this, which is what we came to call accompaniment. You'll see what I mean by that in just a moment. And very little of this. Now, that's actual copulation. In this case, relatively small male, relatively large female. It accentuates what's probably obvious to all of you, that it's very difficult for two pancakes to copulate in the traditional fashion. But males have an amazing ability to swing their hindquarters under, and they always have this posture with the tail curled around the uplifted tail of the female and the adjacent limb curling down into that little circular pattern you see there. I not need to get graphic about it, but you can actually see the pink tissue of the cloaca and the hemipenes there. The left forelimb, male latching onto the back of the female. You can imagine the radio tags a great little. So, only lasts 4 minutes. Only saw it 6 times, complete copulation, but that's the figure for other horned lizards. So it's right in the ballpark. But then this is what really got my attention. And other people had witnessed things like this. My original work with toads, as Beto mentioned, was all about sexual selection, male-female behavior, male-male behavior. And I quickly gathered what this was about. Males stay with females for the remainder of the morning on the morning they copulate. And they maintain physical contact. That first image I showed you, I won't go back, but you saw the male is actually on top of the back of the female. If she moves forward, he won't lose contact. Chases after her, gets on her, claws her back, claws on her head. She seems somewhat bothered by this, who knows? But she eventually settles down and they stay together for 2 to 3 hours. They always break up by the heat of the day. They sometimes become relatively overheated, I'm imagining. I certainly am, trying to find any shade that I can. But this male, we know it's not akin to panting, but it looks like panting, so we loosely call it that. It's not an effective thermoregulatory device to the degree it would be in a dog, of course, that has all sorts of physiological adaptations to render a cooling mechanism, but these were hot and bothered. That leads us to nesting. So this is in August for my population. They must have read my notes because they started August 1st and nobody went past August 31st. All of my nesting events were in the month of August. There are others down this way that are in July, but for me, it was August. Females, if Tom Van Devender was here, would be another shout out. Thanks to Tom's work, we know that they construct a burrow at about a 45-degree angle down about ½ a meter or so. They do this in about 4 to 6 hours. Sometimes they go into the afternoon, taking a siesta, finish it in the late afternoon. But in any case, they're always done within a day, and the next day when you come back, you'll find them like this. And you have difficulty knowing that there's anything going on, except for the fact that you were there before previous day and had a picture of that lizard in a hole exactly where it's lying. And so they guard their nests. Again, we know why they're doing it as a result of some great work that Wade and his colleagues have done. But let's just convince ourselves that this is what they're doing. This was my female that stayed at her nest for the longest time, which was 2 weeks. I'll have some data on that in a moment. There she is under that fallen branch. Her nest was right at the base of her tail, and she remained in this position. We are quite confident it's to protect the nest from nest raiding predators. And a classic one would be this snake, Salvador, which we have on the site, and which I regularly see in the washes adjacent to the primary horned lizard area, probing in the sand of those washes. I'm convinced, looking for chemical cues where the Callosaurus that are there lay their eggs, where Nematophorus, and where occasionally the Phrynosoma come to the edge of that wash and in the embankment will lay their eggs. So I'm convinced they could find these nests, and if they were unattended, presumably have a chance at digging them up and giving it those eggs. You might think, well, a regal horned lizard, well, if you know Salvador, it's rather thin, small snake, and Wade could tell us about it later. Their body tilting and head butting, I can easily see how one of these large females dissuades a snake like this from getting at the nest site. Again, not a huge sample size, not something that we've got to observe regularly each year, but over the entire 10 years, 23 females, not all of them guarded. Some were gone the next day. But that one, 14 days on average, almost a week of nest guarding. Occasionally they would leave and come back. And I counted that in the duration. But if it rained, and at first I thought, oh, it's rain, maybe that's obscured chemical cues in the area, and so they don't need to guard anymore. But I would find them feeding, because rain always stimulates the ants to activity. And then they'd come back, and they'd be back at the nest garden. So, all right. Pre-brumation recovery, September, October for some. It's a mirror image of what happened earlier in the spring. They're feeding, they're not moving much, and they're preparing for overwinter. I just inserted this here since I'm done with the periods. Annual mortality, I mentioned earlier that population probably turns over in 2 to 3 years. No one wants to believe that. I didn't want to believe that. A grad student at ASU in the 60s told everyone this when he was just doing a big pitfall trap study, caught lots of Regal Horned Lizards over a 3-year period. And he estimated that the population turned over in 2 years because of his recapture numbers. I thought, they're a big lizard. They must live for a long time. You put them in a zoo, well, if you learn how to feed them, you could keep them alive for much longer, we imagined. But my population is just like that. I'm lucky to have an individual for a year. Really lucky 2 years, and almost never 3 years. I have one animal who did just recently make it to year 4, and is now dead. So 25% of my tagged animals, this isn't a huge sample of, hundreds of lizards, so take it with a grain of salt. But for the animals I'm tracking over a 10-year period, I lose a quarter of them every year. So that's why it does make sense to call it 50% turnover, the population's turning over in a life history table sense. Predation. Oh, and I'm sorry, I was showing you this one. That animal is dead. And my explanation for this condition is it has been found feeding females in September. That's often when we see most mortality. I think they're spending a lot more time feeding after nesting, makes sense. And a small carnivore, kit fox, gray fox, or coyote, has come, detected the lizard, and when it goes to bite it, and the lizard, as you are confident all know, is going to position its head to deliver a blood sport response and disrupt the predation event. My guess is the canid, we'll assume that's what was involved, bites down just as that occurs, releases it due to the distasteful component, and leaves the animal. But it has bit down enough to kill it. So pure speculation, with cameras and so on, but that's my notion of why you find, and this one's relatively, damaged. Others, it's just clearly one bite to the base of the skull. Other predation events look like this, and here's one where you just have to say, okay, it's guesswork, right? We're speculating after the fact. It's forensic Phrynosoma biology. But there's the head, left-hand side. There's the tag with some blood that's been taken off. The animals sometimes manipulate the tag enough to give you a clue, like I think it's a raptor because it bent it in a particular way. Oh, it's got a bite mark on it, I think. I'll go with carnivore, but it's all guesswork. This one looks like perhaps it was a small bird, an owl. Cooper's hawk, sharp-shinned hawk, prairie falcons are all there. But the animal appeared to have consumed it, perhaps standing on that little branch there, but who knows? Just another example, you might just find the tag, that one's been bent, has blood on portions of it. As opposed to thinking, oh, the lizard just happened to drop the tag, right? You have to always worry about that possibility. But if it's a shed of it, you always find the skin. But again, might not always be true. This was one that happened in real time. Now, I assume you can see the animal looks intact, except for a bite mark right there. Here, I think the vast majority of the blood you see is from the blood squirt event. They always, in these instances where I find them dead, both eyes have fired, if I can use that term. This one is here at one of our active kit fox burrows. I was radio tracking it in the morning. June morning, it's moving a lot, but I have to get on with someone else. But as I leave, he had started near my truck. And I thought, I'll just see where this guy is. It's only 20 minutes since I finished radio tracking. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's gone off at least 100 meters this direction. Oh my gosh, he's going right past that kit box here. Oh my gosh, here he is, dead in the mouth of the kit box burrow. Again, guesswork, I'm convinced as he went by, maybe it was a pup, maybe it was an adult at the mouth of the burrow, sees it, comes out, grabs it, yuck, drops. It's killed it, but it doesn't consume it. Could have easily taken it back down to the burrow. When I come back that evening, it's gone. So my guess is they have no problem with them when they don't get blood squirted in the face. Those of you that read up on how this works and so on might agree that, yeah, that makes sense. They wouldn't have any problem if you served them up filleted horned lizard. Blood isn't a problem in all contexts, but being sprayed dramatically in the face when you don't expect it, different thing. Okay, we're just about at the time I like to consider we should be finishing up. This is just to show for this one animal that we have 4 years of data, the home range was relatively consistent. This is a male. That point right here on the left-hand side is a burst age just outside of its primary home range, just across that tiny little wash. That it went back to overwinter 3 out of the 4 times. Amazing fidelity. We have so few of those, can't make a lot out. Half of the animals who have more than one winter went back to the same person out of hundreds, that might be available. Others were a different birth age or pre-so each time. That's a female, the one that we have 3 years for. Very consistent, overlapping home ranges year in and year out is the only real message there. Here's a lot of data summed up to give you a sense of those movement patterns defining those periods. So on the left-hand side, brumation, they're not moving. Right? The median daily movement is 0. Okay, so you buy that all, I think. Emergence and pre-brumation are the next 2 periods that are relatively low for both sexes. They're moving 5 meters a day. I would give Chuck Lowe, you were right. That's what you would tip up. They're not moving along. But look what happens in the mating season, June and July. Males can be moving 40 meters a day. That's the median. A lot of males that would disrupt it if we used the mean, right? But medians and means are 2 different measures of central tendency. This is half the animals above, half below. There are a handful of males that are averaging 90 meters a day. The entire mating period. They are really getting around. Notice the females are moving up to 20 meters a day. And that in the nesting period, they're high as well. And this is because females move around looking, I'm convinced, for nest sites. I've talked too long about other things, but they go to small little washes and come back. They go to a different one and come back. They're feeding during this time, but convinced they have interests different from the males as to why they might be getting around. And then this, since everyone likes to have a home range to hang a number on, males, average, and the minimum convex polygon, the old fashioned way that nobody likes anymore, but everyone still uses because relate to it. The females are about 2 hectares. Males are about 4 times that, 8 hectares. The column there on the sample size here, roughly again, 3 dozen animals. And again, that's for the entire mean. Okay? So, all right, that's all I want to say for now. It's I've got 45 minutes through, so we want to see the video.
Yes.
Okay. That's whoops. Trying to escape. I just want to escape. Okay, bingo. Now, just go with that one. Oh, okay, good. Very good. Yeah. Okay, here's where we find out how capable these horned lizards are. The folks that told me, and these were ant specialists, Steve Rissy, who was a member of my PhD committee who worked on ants. And he said, no, these species that are capable of mobbing like rugosus would just overwhelm the lizard at the disc or at these large trunk trails. And some, including Walt Whitford and others from New Mexico, wrote papers about, they would focus on these other ant species that are solitary because you can't get mobbed. Well, the problem is, I mentioned those feeding rates lizards have. Now I'm forgetting if I gave you the actual numbers, but those students that were taking them apart, those fecal pellets, each had on average 185 ant heads. So roughly 200 ants taken each morning. They pass one of those pellets every morning. We had multiple females that we followed for up to 10 days, pellet every day, feeding at the same nest. This was why I could have kissed Bob Johnson when he told me there aren't only 4,000 ants in that nest. I just saw a female like 2,000 of them. And the nest never stopped being active. Steve Rissy and Walt Whitford told me they would stop foraging the ants if they lost that many workers. But my nest basically turned off and on, and I could never pin it on a horned lizard because they, even in their peak activity, they go on for about 5 to 6 to 7 days and then they stop. I don't know what governs that. Like a whole nother study to figure out what drives ants. But in any case, these lizards are coming up to the disc. And we'll see, I'm sorry, this is in PowerPoint. Okay. Oops. So she positions herself on that side of the opening. Notice she keeps herself elevated. When ants come by her from behind, she's very cognizant of that, snaps them up. She initially, I think, is going to depart, but she gets her confidence back. There's even an ant on her at this point. She's probably looking at me right now because I'm very close when I'm doing this. She is aware that they're there, but she's quite agile for what you think, right? And you can also see how quickly she can consume 200 ants, not in this sequence, but it only takes about 45 minutes in the morning. I think we'll just start up there. There we go. That's her again a little bit later. But the ants, even having lost repeated individuals, here are those familiar with ant defensive behavior. If she was masticating those ants, the alarm pheromones and such would be just everywhere. But the fact that she's snapping them down without any response, I think, on the part of the ants until it's too late, she's able to maintain this. Occasionally they miss, but not often. Doesn't want that one to get behind her.
It's de-stressing. That they position themselves away from the street.
So if sometimes they're right on the stream to the side, and that's what I always expected. But this just, I used these, I have many hours of these films. I use these just because it's not like I like to think I'm going around, destroying all of these preconceived notions, but this whole idea that they wouldn't go to the disc and that the ants would respond very promptly to them mobbing wise caused me to pick these ones. Oh, and that's just some of them. We have Messer Perganderi. It's not nearly as large, but another seed harvester there. So the students, I was very impressed with herpetology. We had to fact check them that they weren't just, geez, 200, done. And they were identifying the ants correctly. I've seen them feed on more than a dozen different species of ants. Again, so don't write in. Hey, I saw them feed on, they'll feed on the tiniest ants out there. I can barely see the darn things in these little colonies. They're tan, they're red, they're black, and so on. When there's no available Pagoda myrmex. But if they have their druthers, I'm convinced that's who they want. Okay, well, then I think we should stop for questions. I'll be happy to take them. I'm going to sit down. Yeah, go ahead, Wade.
Did you ever get close enough to the ant mounds like that when it was very active to have the ants respond to you
No.
collectively? I mean,
Yeah, no, I did not, and I was
Because-
always very careful though. So
yeah,
I was much more worried than she appeared to be.
rugosis, it is, Photomimics rugosis, they orient, if I walk around a nest,
Yeah,
they follow me, groups of them come out and follow
Oh, wow.
around, and I have to keep following. They're very aware of the presence of a person anyway,
yeah.
and I'm out there collecting ants. So a very different reaction by the ants than
Yeah.
with rugosis.
Yeah, and perhaps I was so cautious in my approach, and I was always trying to stay back from the horned lizard, fearing that I would cause it to stop foraging. But this is one thing I would admit to, being hands off, and I like to think, everyone at THS agrees with this notion that minimal disturbance is best for the animal and so on. Scientists know, unfortunately, that being present, you are disturbing the environment. I'm keeping predators away that might be interested in my horned lizards. I was convinced of this for desert tortoises in days that I would come and find a kit fox or a gray fox moving through my desert tortoise plot in the washes, looking in areas that I knew there were 6 hatchlings there. These little tortoises, just chew toys for a kit fox. And yet when I'm there in the morning, those things are long gone. They do not come out the cane. So we're always affecting our animals. But my horned lizards would habituate to me so that I could get within 2 or 3 meters and continue feeding. They would look at me, look back, go on about their business. So I was still a good distance from the nest.
Another feeding
Yeah.
question. Did you ever see them feeding at mating swarms of Pagoda myrmex?
Absolutely. So I have a little anecdote for you. Those of you that know these mating swarms, the winged males and females are emerging. They often climb up onto a little grass stalk and then depart singly. Sometimes they paired up. That's not, strictly speaking, kosher, according to Steve Brissing. They could be going off and breeding with some other individual from another nest, who knows? But I watched a female one morning pass other winged individuals and other individual ants to pick off pairs repeatedly. And I asked Bob Johnson, I said, you know, she could have picked up a handful of individuals in the number of steps she could have picked up many individuals that were single and they weren't necessarily reproductive. And I said, wouldn't, you know, that have been beneficial rather than going to the pairs? And his suggestion was when they're in copula like that, they might be prevented from stinging. And I thought, well, they're so good at it, would that really be the issue, right? Meaning the horned lizards, they don't worry about being stung for the 200 we see them, but, or it's that much larger and you're getting 2 for 1. Who knows?
This was at the base of a swarm.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is at the nest site as they're emerging.
As they're emerging.
And so if you go around that site in July where
Yeah.
all hell has broken loose from the ants' perspective, there are individuals streaming out in all directions in multiple winged forms, males and females among them. And then those on stalks gave this female the opportunity, if they were a pair, the ants now in copula, she would go for those and avoid individuals on her way to picking them up. I mean, it was only 6, 10, 12 inches. But
What I've been interested in, which I haven't been able to do, is the swarms we see here is that have a solare out there and put it down and see which ones she's feeding on, get the scats, and then see if they're picking up more females than
there you go,
males.
which is what, yeah, would be
I mean, if they pick up pairs, like you said, they're getting half of it's that way, but
yeah.
but where those swarms are, there's tons of ants. They're all over the ground and they could go through and pick very well. And the nutritional value is quite different.
Yeah, and no, I have not seen that. I was always at a nest where they were emerging, yeah. Yeah, there's,
So, I was wondering what they do over the course of, say, a day. You know, are they like bimodal, being active in the morning, active at night, or afternoon, or what?
yeah, I should have mentioned that. So mine are almost entirely morning active animals. They have, in the summer, a time in the late afternoon where they will come out. And here's where Wade and I were talking about this previous conversations with Roger. They will come out and bask on a paved road, for example, after July rains and such, as the sun is setting. And they will feed in the first hour or so. But I only saw this rarely. So they'll go to a nest site. I'm convinced, and I'm not the physiologist, I'm not the visual specialist that I should be to be talking like this. I'm convinced after seeing how adroit they are in the early morning when they're hot and ready to go, that in the evenings when it's cooler, even in July, and it's wet, and they don't have the visual acuity, I'm convinced of that they would in the daytime, that they have a harder time managing the ants while they're consuming. It's just a guess, won't even call it a hypothesis as to why I don't see it as often, because we know those horned lizards can be out at night. I see them regularly on the roadway as I enter. But then when I would go to radio track individuals, hoping to find them out at a nest, those happened to be ones that were down. They weren't active that night, so I missed my opportunity. And I ended up this was a bias I brought to it. After the first couple of years, I just started focusing on the morning. They, under those circumstances, always shut down by 10. Very gentlemanly of them in terms of my need to be done after about 3 hours. 10 to 11, absolutely. And if I came back in the late afternoon or even the early afternoon, even on days when I thought, oh, it's a mild monsoon day after a good storm has come through, 2 to 3 days of that kind of weather. The only individuals I find out and active would be the females who are guarding nests.
Yeah, I mean, you're touching upon kind of what I was getting at is without telemetry, and I know when I lived in Safford, I'd go cruise the Swift Trail.
Yeah.
So I'd leave before it got dark, but that's like when I saw more horned lizards than ever
Absolutely.
on the roads. Oftentimes numerous numbers of them. And it'd be like crepuscular, it's just like dark but not night yet.
Yeah.
But some would linger into night, but it's like that period was when I saw the most ever.
I will not be surprised that some young kid comes along and says, Chuck Lowe had it wrong, and then Sullivan really had it wrong, because look at how much more they actually do at night than he gave them credit for. So I would not be surprised by that, but I couldn't get them to draw me into that. I agree with you. Roger and I were talking about this. I was a kid when I was first coming to Arizona in 1970, 72 and so, and I would road ride Old Spanish Trail, and my highest numbers for Solare were 22 I found in a 1 hour drive along there after a rainstorm, and at least half of those were dead on the road. But the others were on the edge. Many of them were, I think, thermoregulating because it had gotten cool from that cold afternoon rain. The sun had come out and such. But, for all I know, all of them ended up feeding that night. Might have been the first night it rained and ants were out in abundance. But I don't know.
Yeah. Did you ever observe them using burrows of other animals?
No. And this was something I was surprised by. I thought they could use burrows left and right. Now, Wade and I've talked about this. Round-tailed ground squirrels are not the cute little miniature prairie dogs that you imagine. Many of you are nodding already. They'll eat each other. They'll eat any little vertebrate they can get their hands on. A number of my animals disappeared down round-tailed ground squirrel holes, and this was after I knew they never did that of their own volition. So I'm convinced they had been preyed upon. I've lost those individuals. So in literally, it's got to be over 1,500 observations of an animal retiring for the day. It was equivalent to brumation. They go to a shrub, they shimmy into the debris there on the shaded side of that shrub at that time of day, and they're done. I saw them pass burrows hundreds and hundreds of times. I was, this is it, they're going in. No, they just bypass it. It's all. Now, other people have told me they've seen it. I do not doubt for a minute that it happens. But both for brumation and daily retirement, I never saw them go in a burrow. And we have so many rodent burrows there. I don't know if you noticed that kit fox den, probably couldn't see it, but every creosote there is surrounded between the round-tailed ground squirrels, the antelope ground squirrels, the rock squirrels. Then we have at least 6 heteromite rodents. So it's just, they're everywhere. So there's more than enough of them if they want it. At least for my population, it wasn't happening. Yeah.
I'm down from Sierra Vista, Arizona.
Yeah.
Fort Huachuca. I live up in Ramsey Canyon. I know around on my property, I have roughly 6, 7 individuals living on the property. And I got tons of ant mounds all over the place. But I do see them sometimes hiding like under one of my trailers. I'll see them basking, hiding under there, and I'll see it come out to the mound, feed, go right back under the trailer.
Yeah. And do you mean, are they going into a burrow under the trailer?
No, just under the
just in
trailer.
the shade.
They'll a lot of times be hiding over by one of the tires.
Yeah,
And at night when I'm driving around, I'll see them on the shoulders of the road, just
they love
sleeping
that.
there.
As Larry will attest to, lots of lizards love those berms.
Because I see them around Whetstone, or see them around Palominas,
Yeah.
Hereford, all that area down there.
Now, are you in a degraded grassland that's now a creosote flat or a mix, or how would you typify it?
It's a mix, basically, my property's on what used to be called, I believe, the O'Neill Ranch or something like that. That's one of their gathering corrals for their free range cattle. It's actually what my wife and I refer to as a pasture.
Yes.
I still have the posts all the way around, no fence, but the
Yeah.
posts are still there. I see them in there too.
I think that, my Phoenix, again, this pathetic creosote bursage flat that passes for Sonoran Desert is different from, say, the more upland, well-drained rocky soils, cactus area of Tucson. And then your neck of the woods is a whole nother dimension of a more desert grassland mix.
Mm.
And I remember being surprised finding them southeast of Safford and such in areas where, as Larry, you looking for all 4 species on the same road, and Roger, you talked about that you can get in Cochise County. I've never seen all 4 together, but even seeing Solare there, I think this is a different world than the ones I'm seeing.
Yeah, because I have about 1/3 of an acre that just like go natural. I'll mow it maybe once a year if it gets too tall. and the rest of the time we just let it go natural.
Yeah,
And I see them coming out of there, they come out to the gathering corral area that I have. And you'll see them go into the ant mounds feeding, and then they'll run back over underneath one of the mesquites.
Beto, should we look at?
Yeah, Bob BC asked if you see any effects of climate change.
Okay, so I won't go back to that, but this drying that we've experienced, all of us, of course, this last year was just horrific. But what the heck, probably can do it relatively quickly, and since you're not all leaving, we'll take that as a mass flow. So this was here in case I got a question about such things. Summer drought. So that's one of my females. You can tell what those are. Those are her clutch of 24 eggs. What I saw in nesting periods was in dry years, females would repeatedly make test holes and abandon them. They don't fill them in. And I'm convinced they're assessing the moisture content of the soil. And if it's not up to their standards, they don't nest there. I've seen this female in a 10-day period make multiple test holes, never stuck. Finally, I come in the morning and this is how I find her, because she's dumped her eggs. She's on the surface. You know, you ask physiologists, can't they resorb them? Is it smarter? Is that maybe it's not possible? Maybe once you ovulated to this extreme and you built that many nests, you're beyond all recall. And you just lose them. So that's what happened. In this case, not Gonomyrmex rugosa, but the other ants got them. So that's my answer, Bob. I think that my two species there that I'm most concerned about how drought is affecting them, strangely enough, are not anurans, but desert tortoises, the hatchlings, little youngsters, 1 to 3 years of age, are hugely impacted by dry winters because they have to bask and feed all winter in the first couple of years. Adults can take that off. Not that they necessarily do, but not the youngsters, I'm convinced of it. And so a prolonged dry winter, I think, kills them off. Because they have to drink. If you all know that, desert tortoises don't eat lush vegetation that has all the water content they need. They eat very dry, as you'd expect, in most of the Sonoran Desert, most of the time, vegetation, and it in fact requires them to have water that they conveniently store in their bladder to infuse into their circulatory system and to their stomach to process the dry vegetation they consume. For the horned lizards, I think it's the summer. If it's a dry monsoon, it nips their reproductive output at an even earlier stage than the tortoises. Tortoises, it's the hatchlings. Horned lizards, I'm convinced it's egg laying is compromised. And I have, over the 10 years, seen a consistent population decline. So I do not see hatchlings after winters, after dry summers of the horned lizards. Just aren't there. In wet monsoons, I invariably see the hatchlings through to early December because they go to the nest discs and they're capable, even they're tiny little things, 25 millimeters. And to see one of them power down one of these ants, which they are not able to do it like their parents. They, you know,
I was just gonna ask, have you observed that?
Yes, yes, it was quite something because I thought it didn't happen nearly fast enough for what I imagined had to be true. And I only see them take one at a time because of those time periods. Never seen them when the nests were active. I would be impressed if they go to the nests as close as the adults do. But I would find them later in the year, in November, basking in a nest, and they go to the opening, a single ant might come out. I've seen them tackle. Wouldn't be surprised if they take smaller ants elsewhere.
Their growth rate must be phenomenal.
I'm sorry?
The growth rate must be phenomenal.
Oh, it absolutely is. They grow to the reproductive maturity within the year. So they're hatched in September, and by May, they are in the range of 60 to 65 millimeters out that length. males achieve 80 in my population by July 1st. So they are just becoming reproductive. And remember, they didn't hatch until September. By September, now the females don't, I think, have the ability to reproduce in that first year, but they're almost to 85 millimeters by the fall. So by the subsequent year, they hatch first year, their second year females are ready. Males in the first year. Oh,
You like,
that's obscure.
how do you feel about brumation versus hibernation?
So, hibernation, I think, is best left to endothermic vertebrates that, in essence, have a voluntary approach to changing their physiology doing this. Brumation, I think, is just convenient. I don't have a big axe to grind about it. And there are many physiological ecologists who didn't ever agree with Bill Mayhew, who came up with this, based on work on horned lizards, by the way. But I think he captured that there's something uniquely different about what they're doing that isn't tied to just the physiological ecology of thermoregulation. And so I just sort of think it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
Paying homage to him.
Is it something worth noting when we're doing outreach with the station, using specifically, like, we're talking to the public at a table?
Yeah, sometimes it feels a little bit like, jargon, arrogance or some such. And I often just say overwintering.
Yeah.
Because it's just a convenient term. But we know it's different from what a bear does. And what a bear does is different from what, other mammals do and so on. And obviously herps, I'm sure. What Alvarius does is different from what Scapiolus couchi does. Yeah, so I just come to be using brumation. Yeah.
So going back to the male mating behavior, do you have any interesting guesses or data on the turning point that they do when they're traversing a large distance?
Yeah, no idea there. It's, so few observations of the handful of males who did that. The others were moving a lot, but they just happened to stay at home.
Okay.
And so is it that 40 meters a day was true, whether they were one of the migratory ones, shouldn't use that term, the big move boys. Those ones were the ones who had medians or means daily movements of 90 meters a day for the entire month and a half.
But then those are just the outliers then?
Yeah, at some level, but remember, it's only 15 animals, that I've got that much data on for that period to be able to say that. One thing you did remind me though is I didn't get back to it. What do males do when they encounter one another in the copulation or mate guarding stage of reproduction? And then they are very aggressive towards one another. A male who comes in, if the male that's on the back of the female during mate guarding doesn't see him, he'll come in and just plow into the pair. He'll start scraping at the male on the back. The male who's there reacts very strongly. I only saw this twice, but now, as opposed to when I said they're happy brothers to get along on a rock looking for females. But in this stage, there's an active defense. That guarding male chased the intruding male multiple meters away. And the female, I think, saw this as her opportunity to just end this and moved off by herself. When that male came back, he couldn't find her. He looks everywhere, So it's a male thing to attempt, we assume, to prevent any additional copulations and round out his sperm contribution to the next generation. But he only gets that morning, and then they separate and they go down for the day. So, yeah.
So the tracking of the female by the male is almost entirely visual?
Yes, yeah. In fact, on a couple of occasions, it's almost humorous. The frantic stage the male enters into if he loses track of her when she's only inches away, but she's just behind a rock, she's hunkered down. It's just spasmodically, until he finds her and then gets back there. So yes, I think it is entirely visual. I'm sorry.
Someone on the chat, I think,
Okay.
mentioned roadrunners.
Yes, roadrunners are there, and roadrunners could have been the animals who left me unknown as to the fate of an animal. If they took it and moved some distance off site.
Said, 2011, she worked for Phil Rosen, radio tracking in Tucson. Sadly, we saw 2 adult horned lizards end up in the belly the same day.
Absolutely, I remember those results. And so I never had the opportunity to be out tracking and trace my signal, other than to a round-tailed ground squirrel burrow, to an animal. And so, you know, a kid fox burrow, the only one was the one I subscribed to, who was out front. Or, you know, seeing a distant coyote, we see coyotes all the time, gray foxes all the time. Never had that experience. I thought I might, so I would often, when I would lose an animal that was fate unknown, signal's gone. Knowing Hola Hill as I do, I never doubted that the tag had failed. Right, that's likely that you aren't getting a signal. It just doesn't happen, but it's a possibility. Another is it's been taken some great distance. So because this is a site off limits to the public and I have run of the entire place, and it is a disturbed site, some multiple trails. It used to be open to grazing, used to be open to mining, used to be open to off-roaders, just all sorts of abuse. So I could walk or even drive to virtually any part of the site to pick up the signal, and I thought I'd pick one up at Prairie Falcon Roost, or pick one up at a, you know, Cooper's Hawk Nest, and never did. Didn't get any of those kinds of verifications.
You think they do better if they overwinter and more densely vegetated?
So that's my guess as to why they like the burr sage more than the creosote, but they're picking both of those. So, and lots of them are in positions where, like those shots I showed you, you might think, oh, that's 1 in a million. They wouldn't be so exposed, you know.
Yeah.
My students would come out and go, what? You know, there's the tag I saw, it's right there. You'd see it plainly. Again, in dry winters. In wet winters, stuff's growing up
Yeah.
right away and they're completely covered over. And I actually thought they found that anthropomorphizing more uncomfortable. And perhaps they became too cool. But it never appeared like they were taking the physiological approach of it's going to be more variable at the surface. I need to go into a burrow, or I need to somehow construct a nest hole and then overwinter in it, right? We know they're capable of building these things, but they're right at the surface.
Well, thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Yeah, I looked at like today, I flew back into Tucson yesterday from Georgia, Florida, maybe Pinocchio Swamp. No, but then I worked a long time today.